As they stepped down to the first floor, Chris and his group exited Poseidon. Beyond the exit was a large square paved with cobblestones, where fountains were shooting high into the sky in various places. The water that spouted from the fountains formed shapes resembling various marine animals like whales and dolphins, floating and disappearing like soap bubbles. "What are we going to do now?" Claire asked as they stepped into the square.
"For now, let's go into a restaurant, please follow me,"
Martis said as he walked across the square. Chris and the others exchanged glances and silently followed behind. As he left the square, Martis strode confidently through the maze-like alleys. He crossed the bridge and went over several waterways. During his journey, Martis glanced back several times, as if concerned about what was behind him.
"Let's get in here."
Martis stopped in front of the tavern where several barrels were stacked outside. The tavern was quite noisy, with loud voices and laughter spilling out into the street. Claire made a grim expression as if she didn't like it, then shook her head as if to say there was no other choice. Martis looked around cautiously before opening the wooden door and stepping inside. The interior had a design that evoked a Western movie, creating an anachronistic atmosphere. The store was spacious, with several tables placed to allow for ample space. About 70% of the seats were already occupied. Some people are standing and drinking at the counter just inside the entrance. Many of the customers had the appearance of underwater dwellers, but there were also a large number of surface dwellers resembling pirates from the temple. Many customers turned their gaze toward Martis and the others who had just entered the shop. And then, all eyes were suddenly directed towards Elandra. Claire, noticing the gazes of the men, shook her head in disbelief. "Hey, why on earth did you bring us to a place like this?" Claire complained as she sat down at an empty table in the back.
"I'm sorry, it's more convenient for us to have places like this. Most of the people here are visitors from the outside world or outside cities. Therefore, they don't have to be too interested in our conversation."
Claire gave him a look that said she wasn't sure.
"In other words, we in the central office don't really trust them."
At that moment, a waitress came to take the order. Since Chris and the others couldn't really understand the menu, they decided to leave all the ordering to Martis. "You mean, you don't trust the underwater dwellers?" Claire asked after finishing their order. Martis subtly nodded back, conscious of the gazes around him.
"Depending on the situation, even if we obtain aqua, there is a possibility that it could be taken away by them."
"Really?" Claire asked back in surprise. Leaning forward with both elbows on the table, Martis nodded again. "What are they planning to do by doing that?" Just as Claire asked another question, the waitress promptly brought the drinks. She placed large glasses, like beer mugs, on the table for each person. Each mug is filled to the brim with an unknown bright blue beverage. Martis explained that it's a drink called vinen. It's a special beverage made by fermenting and aging fruit wine, then removing the alcohol content and combining it with ingredients derived from seaweed harvested from the ocean floor. A drink was prepared for Bibi in a shallow container. The container held a drink that was white like milk, but Martis said it was made from seaweed as well.
"So, about the question you asked earlier,"
Martis began after the waitress left. While listening to the conversation, Chris took a sip of the vinen. It had a slightly unusual texture. When it entered his mouth, the liquid strangely transformed into a chewy texture. And when he bit into that lump, the liquid burst out. The moment he bit into it, there was a faint sweetness and the scent of grapes wafted through his nose.
"People from the underwater world always want to compare themselves to those from the underground world and feel superior,"
Martis said, keeping his eyes around.
"If they were to obtain aqua, the people here would surely want to take credit for it." Earlier, Gion mentioned that he was not interested in the aqua, but in reality, he must still be desperately searching for it. If we were to get it, it would be a complete disgrace. Even if they say they won't interfere, they might still get in the way. And even if they don't, they might be waiting for the moment we obtain it to snatch it away from us.
What? That sucks, Clare said, resting her chin on her hand. Nodding in agreement with Clare's words, Martis lifted his mug and took a sip of Venin.
However, if it leads to dimensional ascension without falling into the hands of darkness, then of course, we wouldn't mind that at all.
Martis said, placing his mug down. What do you mean? Clare asked back while resting her chin on her hand.
Well, we, along with the Galactic Federation, believe that there may be individuals from the underwater world, possibly even high-ranking officials, who are involved with dark forces. Given that various information is being manipulated now, we cannot definitively say there is no connection. The likelihood may be low, though. However, if such a thing were to happen and the crystal element were to fall into the hands of dark forces, it would be too late.
That's why the Galactic Federation has requested the acquisition of Aqua from the central office of the TOs. Clare nodded repeatedly as if she understood. Curiosity was evident in her eyes. Still, I always felt like I couldn't trust the underwater people from the beginning, but it seems my intuition was right after all. Clare said with a smug expression.
So, what should we do from here on out?
Sana jumped in and asked.
Anyway, I understand that we need to find Aqua before the dark forces and the people of the underwater world do, but...
A pretty lady like you looks bored playing with kids in a place like this.
Suddenly, a bald man with a beard all over his face spoke to Elandra. He has a physique like a bodybuilder, and his upper arms seem to be as thick as Chris's waist.
Why don't you drink with us?
I prefer that girl over there.
A few rough-looking henchmen also showed up, letting out vulgar laughs. Shut up, we're in the middle of an important conversation. We don't have time to talk with you guys. Go away. Clare glared firmly, and the pirates exchanged glances and laughed loudly.
A feisty kid, huh? I love it. By the way, why don't you have a drink with us? We've got plenty of gold and jewels,
said the bald big man as he approached Elandra. Clare let out an obvious sigh and turned away, saying, I don't know. As Martis stepped forward to stop the big man, the surrounding pirates restrained him. Chris caught the jumping and barking BB and held him in his arms. It was at that moment when the big man reached out and lifted Elandra's chin. The arm of the big man that touched Elandra suddenly burst into flames.
What the fuck?
The big man shouted, desperately slapping his burning arm with his other hand.
Luke, I gonna help you.
Stop it, idiot.
One of the pirates splashed the big man with the liquor from a barrel. Then the fire spread rapidly. The big man collapsed onto the floor and writhed. Ramal, put out the fire, Clare said quietly while resting her chin on her hand. Ramal nodded and raised his arm towards the pirate called Luke. Then, a large amount of water poured down from somewhere. Soaked, Luke stood up while coughing.
I won't let you get away with this. Let's go.
Luke spat out a parting shot and left the tavern with his gang of pirates. All the customers in the tavern were focused on the table where Chris and the others were sitting. Some of them were cheered and applauded.
Aren't you hurt?
A waitress asked as she picked up the dishes scattered on the floor. The floor, which had been soaked, was completely dry without anyone noticing. We're fine, Elandra replied, and the waitress bowed her head with an apologetic expression.
By the way, you looked really cool. Where are you from?
From the underground world. When the waitress asked Elandra, Clare answered from the side.
I thought, as expected. Since you arrived, you've been so dignified and full of grace.
The waitress said, turning to Clare and placing her hands together in front of her chest.
Are you here for sightseeing? Or is it for work?
Well, it's not for sightseeing, but... Martis interrupted Clare's response.
Excuse me, we have to leave now.
Huh? Where are we leaving? Ignoring Clare, who looked up at him, Martis apologized to the waitress, saying, I'm sorry for the disturbance.
Well, let's go.
Leaving the unfinished Venan behind, the group followed Martis, drawing the attention of the customers and staff as they left the tavern. Hey, wait! Where are we going this time? Clare asked as she chased after Martis.
We need to be more cautious in our behavior. We don't know where the dark forces are watching from.
Martis said without looking back.
For now, let's change our location,
said Martis as they approached the waterway, spotting an empty boat and boarding it. It was a small boat about half the size of Enaboss's ship. Following the captain's instructions, Chris and the others all sat down in their seats. The captain was short and plump, with the same blue skin as Enabos. Humming cheerfully.
Are you okay, Sana?
Chris asked Sana, who was staring silently at the waterway.
Huh? Yeah.
She might have been shocked by the earlier fight with the pirates. It was definitely a little scary.
No, I was just lost in thought.
Sana smiled back as if she read Chris's mind. After that, she asked Martis.
So, what exactly are you planning to do from now on?
Martis looked up and gazed at Sana.
You're going to search with Rebellipes, right?
Chris touched the dagger at his waist and asked. The desire to find the dragon stone quickly and return home was growing stronger. Martis fell silent for a moment, as if deep in thought.
No, let's not use the Rebellipes for now.
What? Why not?
Chris asked back, puzzled.
If that's the case, how are we supposed to find the dragon stone?
If we use the Rebellipes now, it could draw the attention not only of ourselves but also of the underwater people. It may not always be accurately indicated from the start, but if it is correct, there is a danger that those closer to it than us will find it first. Moreover, if the stone we are looking for is not in this Atlias but in another city, it could be fatal.
Exactly, Chris thought. That does make sense. If the light that Rebellipes points to is visible to those around us, it would mean publicly revealing. Aqua is right here.
So, when using Rebellipes, let's decide to use it as a last resort once we've narrowed down the location to some extent.
But how do we narrow down the location to some extent? Clare asked from the side, and Martis gazed into the distance. Then, he murmured, I have been preparing for this moment.